Feet were the remains of Justin McBride, whitish gray and bloated. The wound to his neck appeared quite deep, and if he wasn't supine on the dock, his head would probably lean back toward his shoulders. He had rope around his wrists and ankles, a lead weight attached to the latter, and his eyes were gone. None of this was random, and it had all the markings of a mob hit. Violent and dramatic enough to send a statement. Where was he found? Who found him? She rubbed her arms, the chill of the night and damp air seeping into her bones. He was found by a boater getting ready to take a midnight cruise, Terry said. McBride was just to the side of the dock, weighed down, as you can see. Placed somewhere he could be found sooner rather than later. Yup. Now, I've already spoken with the boater and cleared the guy. He's just an innocent caught up in all this. Terry squared his shoulders as if daring her to challenge him on that point, which she might have at any other time, when the evidence didn't seem to clearly point to the mafia. She gestured toward the empty sockets and looked at Richards. The eyes gone due to fish, or... She swallowed roughly, barely able to stomach the alternative her mind spun. Richards set his lips into a straight line. From what I'm seeing, preliminarily, I'd say they were cut out of his face while he was alive. She put a hand on her stomach. This was the work of the mob, likely Tatiana Ivanova herself. The torture was too barbaric to be anything else. When did he, time of death? Guilt was snaking in on her from around the edges. If only we'd been a little faster. I'd say he's been in the water at least a couple of days, Richard said. But I'll know once I have him back at the morgue and run more tests. Cause of death would quite obviously appear to be the slash to the neck. Guessing a large knife, and considering the damage I'm seeing, I wouldn't be surprised if the blade nicked cervical vertebrae. This is the mob, Terry, she punched out. We need to just step back, get all the evidence. No, they don't get the luxury of killing people like this and walking away. That's not the justice system I work for. She went to leave, but Terry put a hand on her shoulder. We don't get to make our own version of justice. But they repeatedly get off, she snapped. They've got money for the best lawyers. And she should know. One of them was an ex, but now wasn't the time to pile on even more self-judgment. Terry added, That's why it's integral to build a solid case against them, then go after them. She gritted her teeth and stared out at the black surrounding her, darkness creeping into her soul. Fine, she pushed out. We do it your way. Terry dipped his head. They spent the next hour with the body, but at Terry's insistence. She left McBride's apartment for crime scene to process. She was beyond exhausted at this point. Though it was unlikely sleep would come, she had to try. She was of no use to the case or anyone if she made herself sick. Still, all she could think about was retaliation. Sure, Justin McBride was a killer, and he deserved to pay for his crimes. But not the way he had. And her heart was aching at thoughts of Kayla Fleming. Was she still alive? Or would they be finding her body next? Chapter 29. As Madison had suspected, she barely got any sleep, and the amount she had was riddled with nightmares. One's about her conversation with the Middletons, the fact that they were in WITSEC, and the connection to her grandfather. Then there was Courtney telling Madison she had no choice but to stage her disappearance. Other dreams were about dead bodies, flashes of imagery layered one on top of the other in some sort of macabre collage. She had bolted awake at the sight of Kayla's face on McBride's body and decided she was up for good, rested or not. A text on her phone confirmed her nightmares were based more on reality than she'd have liked. Richards told her the autopsy on McBride would take place today at noon. She staggered out the door, stopping on the way to the police station to mail the DNA exemplars to a testing lab that guaranteed results in a week. A week. And yet it takes police departments months. Sometimes the inconsistencies hurt. Madison sucked back on an extra-large coffee as she checked her email for updates on what had been recovered from McBride's apartment. There was one from Mark, who told her they'd recovered a Smith & Wesson M&P M2.0 and 9mm ammunition. That was the same caliber used on the women at the train station and on Nikitin. Sam would still need to run ballistics testing to confirm if the weapon recovered was the gun used in both shootings. Mark had also found a phone in McBride's place. Madison fired back a quick email to Mark and told him it was possible McBride was just a hired gun and to get his financial records. She also asked him to let her know if there was anything useful on his phone ASAP. Hey. Terry came in holding his own coffee and looked about as thrilled at the twist in the case as she was. Not very. Hi. He dropped into his chair. Guess it's case closed. We got the shooter, and I'm sure Sam will confirm the gun's a match for the murder weapon. He must have read Mark's email on his phone. Not exactly. We don't have motive and… Sometimes we don't get all the answers. She stiffened. We don't have evidence to support why he shot the women. Until then, this case is wide open. We can't dismiss that McBride may have been a hired gun. He could have had a connection to one of the women and took all this on himself, Terry countered. Either way, he's out of reach now he's dead. Uh-huh. But if someone paid him for the shooting, that person is likely very much alive. And I'm not about to let them get away with murder. Don't you think they deserve to pay for their role in all this? Terry sighed and grimaced. Of course. All right then. We keep doing our jobs. We get all the answers. Then, once we have them, the case is closed. You determined to get all the answers before you go after this Tatiana? Don't feel like I have a choice. Madison would deal with her soon, but one investigation at a time. She recalled Richard's text. McBride's autopsy is at noon today, she told Terry. Yeah, Richard's messaged me too. She nodded, her mind drifting to Kayla Fleming. Again, she wondered if the girl was even still alive. An email filtered into her inbox and caught her eye. Huh, and would you look at that? We have the approval to access the phone records for the 3 women from the train station. And their financials. It's like Christmas around here. Even better. Unwrapped presents made a mess. But by the time she and Terry saw everything through, there would be closure, and the victims would have justice. That was pretty much the only thing that got Madison out of bed that morning. Chapter 30. Surely there had to be something in the phone records and financials. Otherwise, Madison wasn't sure of their next step. Confronting the Russian mob at this point wasn't a true option, even if there was a part of her that really wanted to. It was dangerous, but debatably effective. Still, she had promised Troy that she'd watch her steps and her back. If only she had contacts to help her find people, like Tatiana Ivanova had. Then maybe she could have found McBride sooner and she could get to Kayla now. But Madison didn't have people on every street corner, and Major Crimes wasn't exactly the unit designed for having confidential informants. It's not like their investigations took them back to the same people time and time again. The mob excluded, but no one was snitching on them. Terry was already at his desk, starting on the phone records. She called Marsh. He answered on the first ring. She was quite sure he groaned when she announced who it was. How is the investigation into a drug-trafficking ring at Liberty Station going? Don't answer to you, Knight. She shrugged, not that he could see. Did you get the picture I sent? Uh-huh. She swallowed her initial reaction, which would have had her lashing out at him. We have her name now, by the way. Kayla Fleming. I'll do all I can to help. Maybe you have CIs that have seen her around? Show her picture to them, please. I'll take care of this. Please, she's in real danger. From? Madison hesitated. If she said the mob, then he might laugh at her. Even though her theories had a way of panning out most of the time, people often didn't want to hear that the Russians were behind anything. Let's just say dangerous people. And last I knew, you took an oath to serve and protect, so save the speech. I'll see what I can do. All I can ask. Thanks. She ended the call. Hey, so I found something you'd like to know. Terry lifted his gaze from his monitor and looked across his desk at her. Dana Ridley's phone records don't indicate that she was sleeping with someone else other than her boss. But I came across something interesting nonetheless. 5 months ago, there were several calls between her and a place called Lotus Family Planning. I did a quick internet search. They're an insemination bank. Dana's baby may very well not have been her husband's or David's. Well, both men claimed they couldn't father a child. And without getting their medical records, we can't know for sure. We'd also have to get a warrant for Lotus Family Planning to give us information on Dana Ridley, neither of which we'd get approval for. Right. But it occurred to me that if she hid her pregnancy from the 2 men in her life, What else might she have been hiding? Something that could have made her a target? Good questions. You keep plugging, and I'll get started on Walker's phone activity over here. And that's what she did. For the next hour or so, Morgan Walker had made calls to her husband, her work, companies who were supposedly clients. Madison made a list of these and would have Morgan's employer confirm whether or not that was the case. Morgan didn't seem to be hiding anything, except possibly her past life as Courtney Middleton. And if so, that was a biggie. She moved on to Shannon Brennan's phone records, and nothing exciting there. In that time, Terry had progressed to the financials, starting with the Ridley's accounts. Nada. Nothing to see with the Walker's financials either, she said. He didn't respond. Terry, she prompted. I'm quite sure I just found something. Just the way he said it had the hairs rising on her arms. What? I'm looking at the Brennan's joint savings account. There were 3 cash withdrawals for $1,500 over the last 3 weeks. None before that? Nope. The skin tightened on the back of her neck. Money for a hitman? Looks like it's time to talk to Russell Brennan. Only thing is, if he ordered a hit on his wife, he never got his money's worth. Shannon's still alive. She glared at him. But 2 other women are dead, and Shannon, as far as I know, is still recovering in the hospital. Though there could be complications, like this entire case. Madison sent over a brief text to Richards to inform him that she and Terry would be missing the autopsy on McBride. He acknowledged her message and promised to make good notes as always. Madison and Terry were sitting in the living room at the Brennan residence around noon. Shannon was still in the hospital, so they were face to face with Russell. Could we see your bank card, Mr. Brennan? Terry asked. On the way over, they decided that Terry would start the questioning because the withdrawals were his find. Sure. He fished his wallet out of his back pocket and then handed the card to Terry. He looked at the numbers and gave it back to him. Thank you. Now, can you tell us what these cash withdrawals were for? Terry produced a copy of the statement with the transactions in question highlighted in yellow. Russell took the sheet from him and looked down the page. He squinted. I never took out this money. This is a statement for your bank account, isn't it? It is, but that doesn't make sense. Shannon must have done it. I just saw your bank card, Mr. Brennan, and that's the last 4 digits of your card, right? Terry pointed a finger to the page. The transactions were split by card number, then in date order. I don't have an explanation. It doesn't make any sense. Madison settled back in her chair, relaxed, nonchalant, ready to become involved in the conversation. Does the name Justin McBride mean anything to you? No. You're sure? She pushed. Positive. So you wouldn't object to us looking at your phone records or your computer? Wait a minute. What do you think I'm guilty of? Because it's obviously something. Madison gestured toward Terry for him to answer. A total of $4,500 was taken out of your bank account, in cash. Unusual behavior, which you can't even seem to explain, Terry said. Shannon must have... Terry was quick to counter. She uses your bank card? Russell pursed his lips and shrugged. I don't see why she would. Then you can understand why we're here asking you about the cash withdrawals. You take out all this money, and then there's a shooting. Do you get where I'm going with this? You think that I... It's looking quite possible that you hired someone to kill your wife, only they failed. The shooter did kill 2 other women, though, including one who was pregnant. No, you have this all wrong. And I wouldn't hire someone to hurt my wife. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we had a decent marriage. Decent? Madison spat. Sounds like a glowing review. Though it was an improvement over his first description that it wasn't a bed of roses. Russell narrowed his eyes. Shannon's still alive. You give that any thought? If I had hired someone to kill her, shouldn't she be dead? You tell us, Mr. Brennan, she pushed out. Maybe you hired someone to injure her. Maybe she survived but wasn't meant to. No, I didn't take out this money, and I certainly didn't commission someone to kill my wife. Having other victims involved was rather clever. Throws off the investigation, Madison said, and Terry was staring a hole through the side of her head. I didn't. He clamped his mouth shut. You must be really disappointed that she's still alive. Madison just kept poking the gaping wound. His chin quivered, and he shook his head. I want a lawyer. Fine by us, but have him meet you down at the station. Chapter 31. Madison and Terry spent the next hour and a half interrogating Russell Brennan and getting nowhere. Finally, she reached out to Cynthia and asked for help. Could you contact the Brennan's bank to see if you can find out the location where the money was taken from? Then see if you can get access to security video from either the bank or the city, depending on what applies. They had to consider all the possibilities. But if it had been Shannon who withdrew the money with her husband's bank card, the question was, why use his card? And for what purpose? It was entirely possible the cash had nothing at all to do with the shooting. I'll see what I can do, Cynthia told her. Also, I emailed Mark, and he's probably on it, but look at McBride's financials. See if there's anything there that furthers the investigation. We're all over it here. Cynthia laughed and hung up. Madison and Terry boarded an elevator at Stiles General and spoke to the afternoon nurse on duty. She told them that Shannon Brennan would likely be released tomorrow if all her tests came back good. She certainly had fared much better than Ridley and Walker. Shannon was sitting in her bed watching television and eating from a pudding container when they walked in. She had her color back, and she smiled when she saw them enter. Detectives? Good news for me? We're still investigating, Madison said firmly. Do you ever use your husband's bank card? I have no reason to. Why do you ask? Honestly, this was what Madison had suspected. Russell Brennan was the one with a secret to hide, and he was doing all he could to protect it, including sending them running all over the place, trying to shoot down his ridiculous claim of innocence. There were 3 cash withdrawals from your shared account over the last 3 weeks. Do you have any idea what this could have been for? Madison produced the printout of the statement. Shannon set down her spoon and the pudding cup, pushed the wheeled table aside, and looked at the highlighted transactions. None. Did you ask Russell about this? I'm sure he could tell you. Maybe he was trying to surprise me with something? Madison chewed on that. How could it be much of a surprise when the amounts were a regular occurrence for 3 consecutive weeks? Surely, Shannon would have noticed the money coming out of the account. Did you see these transactions coming out before now? No. Wouldn't know the first step. Russell takes care of the budget. And you asked if I used his card to take out the money? I would never take out that much money without running it past him. Not to mention, why would I use his card? I have my own. Do you have any idea what your husband might need that money for? Madison asked. Shannon pressed her lips. Nothing comes to mind except for a possible surprise. How is your marriage? Good. Solid. Why? Your husband told us you have your fair share of disagreements. Nothing more than the ordinary couple. Shannon's eyes narrowed. Do you think that he... She waved a hand, cutting herself off. No, there's no way he hired someone to kill me. I'm right here, alive. Besides, I thought this was some drug dealer thing. Because... Well, that's what the paper made it sound like. And it wouldn't surprise me, considering that girl with the backpack and the guy who shot at us. Smacked of a handler protecting something to me. They'd first heard the rumor about a drug-trafficking ring operating through the train station from Julie Nelson. And during their first conversation with Shannon, she claimed not to have seen Kayla, the handler, or the shooter before. And the paper is the only reason you said the shooting was connected to drug trafficking? Yeah. Not much else to do here but sleep and watch TV. She pointed to the one mounted on the wall across from her bed. Do you know Julie Nelson? Is that the Julie that works at Just Beans? Do you know her outside of Just Beans? Maybe you're friends? Nope. She just gets my coffee. Shannon smiled. Does the name Justin McBride mean anything to you? Terry interjected, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the room. Shannon seemed to give it some thought. Eventually, she said, No. Madison and Terry saw themselves out, and in the hall, she said, I'm just curious why Shannon is so certain now that the girl with the backpack, Kayla Fleming, was involved with a drug trafficking operation. I don't know. I'm not making too much out of it. I can't help make something of it. Not that I know what. And just a gut feeling. But is there some way these women were connected that we're not seeing yet? Don't know. But do we let Russell Brennan go for now? They had 24 hours to hold him without pressing charges. But it would take longer than that to get things moving with the bank. I don't think we have a choice until we have more on him. They loaded into the department car. Terry snapped his seatbelt into place. What if we approach things from outside the box? Okay, she dragged out. Let's consider that all the husbands are clean, even Russell Brennan. Then where does that leave us? She gave it some thought. We can rule out Dana Ridley and Morgan Walker. Terry smiled. Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. Guess my mind goes to who wasn't injured. The Just Beans employees. Shannon Brennan. Again, what would be her motive? Who was her target? And that doesn't explain the money coming out with her husband's bank card. Let's slow down, just a little. Terry raised his eyebrows. Not used to that line from you. Yeah. I say let's dig deeper. See if the women may have crossed paths. Maybe through their jobs? Shannon's in advertising and Morgan was a lawyer. Lawyer offices need advertising, don't they? I think every business that wants to make money does. But you're suggesting Shannon took out the cash with her husband's card to pay a hitman? Just a possibility. She paid someone to shoot her? And does she really hate her husband enough to frame him? Because that's exactly what it would do. Well, we know the marriage wasn't rosy. Okay, but there's a long leap between that and her killing people to frame her husband. There has to be more motive here. I agree. It only confirms to me that we need to see if we can uncover any connection between the Brennans and the victims of the shooting. Terry paled. You brought up a possible connection between Shannon and Morgan, but what about Dana Ridley? Could be that the environmental firm where she worked hired Spark Media. Could be. Madison just hoped they unraveled the riddle before more people died. Chapter 32. The next morning, Madison and Terry were on the road for Brayberry. She was armed with a list of companies she'd taken from Morgan's phone. She planned to run this by the manager there to confirm that these were clients of the law firm, then go from there, if necessary. They'd also ask if there were any dealings between the firm and Spark Media, where Shannon Brennan worked. They made it to Peters, Hampton, and Douglas by 10 a.m. and were shown to a fancy conference room with a mahogany table and credenza and views of the city. The firm was located on the 7th floor of a high-rise. Miss Holt will be with you shortly, said the woman who had shown them in. Thank you, Terry replied with a smile. Madison paced near the table and stopped next to the window. If Courtney was Morgan, as Madison suspected, she had graced the floors of this building, most likely the one right in this boardroom. And while she'd been alive and working, Madison spent those years worried that her friend had met with a horrible fate. She clenched her hands into fists. How dare you do this to me, Courtney? To your parents? Detectives? A woman in a tight-fitting skirt suit opened the conference door room. I'm Gabriella Holt. You wanted to speak with me? Such a shame about Morgan. Her face was blotchy, and so was her chest where her flesh showed in the V of her blouse. It is, Madison said, and gestured for the woman to sit. She made the introductions, then led with, We have some questions for you. Certainly. Whatever I can do to help. Holt smiled pleasantly and clasped her hands on the table. Have you ever heard of the company Spark Media? Yes, of course. They do the big billboards in the city. What about them? Have you hired them to market for the firm? Madison asked. Not that I'm aware of, and I need to sign off on all promotions. There went that possible connection between Shannon and Morgan. Madison pulled out the list she'd culled from communications on Morgan's phone. Do you know these company names? Holt eyed her suspiciously, but took the paper. She scanned it and looked at Madison. Where did you get these? They were people Morgan had called from her phone, she said, still suspecting they were businesses the firm represented. Well, these are clients of the firm, all except for this one here. She pushed a manicured fingertip to the page, and Madison read the name. Innovative Creatives. You don't know them? I've heard of them, yes, but they're not clients of the firm. If Madison remembered right, Morgan had been in contact with them often. Do you know what they do? They rent desks and office space to startup companies. They're usually very selective about the people they allow in. Seems like you know a lot about them, Terry said. My brother used to rent a desk for a few hours a week. He came up with some harebrained, get-rich-quick scheme. It didn't pan out, but no one can say my brother doesn't act on his ideas. Do you know why Morgan would have been in contact with them? Madison asked. Holt hitched her shoulders. Not really sure, no. But maybe they were looking to hire our firm. Usually, in those type of situations, she'd have notified me. Maybe she just didn't get a chance. Her gaze dipped to the table. You were close with Morgan? Madison asked, her insides jumping. You could say that. We worked together for 5 years. Were you friends outside of work? Madison asked. We'd go out for drinks sometimes. More a casual friendship. But she was great. Always so out there. Adventurous, you know? Sounded like Courtney. What was your impression of her marriage? They hadn't fully ruled out the husbands yet, and had only touched the surface with the financial statements for the three couples. The possibility was the money for a hitman was taken from an account they didn't know about, assuming the money withdrawals from the Brennan's account had nothing to do with the shooting. Oh, I think she and Shane were the perfect match. Meant to be, she grinned, but it faded fast into a frown. He must be devastated. He has the kids, too. I should really reach out. It's just so hard to know what to say in these types of situations. You should call him, Madison assured her. He'd appreciate that. Holt nodded. I will. After this meeting, in fact. Please just leave out mention that we were here, though, Madison added. If Shane was somehow involved with the shooting, it could alert him and send him running. All right, I won't. She was grateful Holt just accepted Madison's request without need for an explanation. Do any of these names mean anything to you? Dana Ridley? No. Shannon Brennan? No, sorry. Justin McBride? Might as well go for the trifecta. Nope. Courtney Middleton? Madison figured, what the hell. Holt shook her head. No, again. Are you aware of anyone who might have had an issue with Morgan? Still a procedural question worth asking. Not that I know of, and I can't even imagine Morgan having enemies. What about cases she defended but lost? Any of those people make their displeasure known? Possibly come after her? Madison asked. You mean threaten her? Madison nodded. I suppose, but nothing drastic like showing up here. There have been some strongly worded emails over the years, and then delays in paying our billing department. All we can do is represent our clients to the best of our abilities. We can't guarantee them the outcome they want. Could you send a copy of any recent threats to me? Madison pulled out her business card and handed it to Holt. I'll see what I can do. Thank you, and we're sorry for your loss. Madison stood. Would we be able to see Morgan's office? I don't see why not. Follow me. Holt led them to a brightly lit space with a nice desk and views of the city. A tropical plant stood in the corner. Madison and Terry took some time to look around, including in drawers and cabinets. Detective Knight? Terry said, sticking with formality, as Holt insisted on remaining as they did their search. She went over to where he was standing, next to the desk, a slip of paper in his hand. Found this under her desk pad. It's a receipt for a coffee. The name on the top is Innovative Creatives. Madison looked at Holt as if to seek an explanation. They have a small bakery there, Holt said. Detective Grant, I think we've seen enough for now. Madison turned to Holt and gave her a pleasant smile. Thank you for being so cooperative, and again, we're sorry for your loss. They left, and once on the sidewalk, Terry said, Why was Morgan in touch with Innovative Creatives? Not just in touch with them, but in the building. Was it simply a potential new client? Could be. Whatever the reason, I intend to find out. Though I'm not sure how much it will aid the investigation. But first, we're going to drop by Spark Media to speak with them about Shannon. See if they've ever heard of Morgan Walker or Dana Ridley. Madison just hoped she and Terry weren't hamsters going around on a wheel getting nowhere. Chapter 33. It was after 3 when Madison and Terry left Spark Media. They had a short conversation with Shannon's boss, who didn't offer much. But Shannon was alive, so if she felt her employer's disclosures violated her rights, she could sue the company. Her boss did tell them that as far as he knew, Shannon and her husband had a decent marriage, whatever decent really meant. She'd guessed that to mean no one was hiring a hitman to take out the other one, but the fact remained that $4,500 was unaccounted for. Shannon's employer had never heard of Dana Ridley, Morgan Walker, or Courtney Middleton. She and Terry just stepped onto the sidewalk when her phone rang with a call from Cynthia. Madison shuffled off to the side and ducked down an alleyway. Out of earshot of passersby, she answered on speaker so Terry could hear. Track down the withdrawals from the Brennan account, Cynthia said. Each one of them were taken out at the same ATM here in Stiles. I've got the requests going through the proper channels to get the security footage from the vestibule where the machine is located. Great job, Cyn. Why, thank you. Have you or Mark seen McBride's financials yet, or accessed his phone? Yes, was just about to tell you. He deposited $1,500 3 times over the last 3 weeks. These came a day after each of the Brennans' withdrawals. That can't be a coincidence. She rushed out and turned to Terry. Do you have any leads on motive? No, and right now we're in Braybury seeing if we can find a connection between the women in case it's relevant. How's that going? So far, goose egg. Keep at it. I know if there's anything to be uncovered, you'll find it. Hey, Terry said. Cynthia laughed. I meant you, as in both of you. Huh. Terry smirked at Madison. He was only pretending to be offended. What about McBride's phone? Anything useful? Unfortunately, no. No communication between him and whoever paid him then? Text messages, emails? Madison mumbled. Again, that would be a no. There was nothing in the phone records or communications they had, but they didn't have their hands on Russell's phone history. But with McBride depositing the same amount of cash as taken from the Brennans' bank account, with Russell's card no less, any judge would approve a subpoena request. All right, well, stay safe. Thanks. Madison hung up, and she and Terry popped out of the alley. Her stomach rumbled at the smells coming from someplace nearby. She inhaled deeply. Charcoaled meat. And God, yes, she could do a cheeseburger. Time to eat. I was hoping you were going to say that. Terry rubbed his stomach. It's been growling for an hour. She noted the time on her phone as she went to put it into a pocket. 3:15 p.m. No wonder she was starving. The last thing she'd eaten was a bagel before leaving home that morning. She didn't even have a Hershey's bar on her. What a shame. They followed their noses around the corner to a barbecue joint with sticker lettering on the windows and an animated LED flame sign. The place smelled even more intoxicating inside. She was practically drooling by the time she took her first bite. But the wait and the torture had been worth it. They'd taken a corner booth next to the window that faced the sidewalk and watched the world go by. As Madison's grandmother liked to say, people passed in a constant stream, and the observation popped her back to Monday morning when she'd noted all the pedestrians on the sidewalk in Stiles. To think that was 4 days ago was hard to believe, as it felt so much longer. Even worse, it was 4 days and 4 bodies later. Ridley, Walker, Nikitin, and McBride. Was Kayla Fleming still alive? Madison wanted to save that girl so badly. She hadn't been able to save her friend, though it would seem she hadn't needed saving. Madison was still trying to come to terms with that, an especially hard thing to do after thinking Courtney had been dead all these years. She and Terry left the burger joint about 20 minutes after going in. Their hunger was sated, and she was beyond ready to make some real progress with this case. All right, next up is Innovative Creatives. She pulled out her phone and Googled the place to get directions. Maddie, no need for that. Terry nudged her elbow and jutted his head toward a sign on a building a few doors down. They must have missed it before because they were so focused on getting something to eat. Not very far from Spark Media, she said. The comment essentially a throwaway. Did it mean anything to the case? They entered the building and went to the front desk where 3 young women were working. One was on the phone, one looked up from whatever she was doing on a computer, and the third greeted them. Welcome to Innovative Creatives. How can I help you? She offered a genuine smile that lit her eyes. Madison flashed her badge quickly to get the point across, but not for long enough to allow her to see Styles embossed on it. We'd like to speak with the manager. Oh, 1 minute. She turned to the coworker who was on the computer. Selma, could you speak with them? Selma regarded Madison and Terry with suspicion, but she tried to cover it with a smile as she stood. What is this regarding? Selma asked. Sophie, the general manager, isn't in right now. We're here on police business. If she's not here, then whoever is next in charge will be fine, Madison said. Selma squared her shoulders. That would be me. Madison resisted the urge to question that out loud. Selma barely looked old enough to have graduated high school, and she was in charge of the building? Your last name, Selma? Just for the record. Washington. All right, Selma. Would you be able to tell us if Innovative Creatives had any dealings with a law firm named Peters, Hampton, and Douglas? I've never heard of them. Why would we have dealings with them? Since they're lawyers, I'd suspect legal issues that might arise. It came out a little sharp, but she'd asked a stupid question. I don't think so. Selma crossed her arms. And you'd know if there were legal issues? I would have heard about it, yes. Madison had no choice but to take her word on it for now and move on. What about the name Morgan Walker? Does it mean anything to you? Yes, of course. Selma's exuberance faded. Oh, you're the police. Asking about her. Is she all right? Unfortunately, she was killed Monday morning at a shooting in Styles. Selma's blue eyes pooled with tears. At the train station? Madison nodded and the woman continued. I heard about that, but had no idea Morgan was... She covered her mouth, blinked, dropped her hand, and took a deep breath. She cleared her throat. Involved? What can I do? Anything? Tell us how you know her, Madison said. She rents an office here. She held a job at the law firm I mentioned, but this place caters to startup businesses, is that correct? That was what Holt had told them. Yes, we do. So Morgan had a business of her own, doing what? Madison asked. Selma winced. It's not my place to say. But you know? Madison recalled Holt saying this place was selective about whom they rented space to. Yes, but... We'd like to see her office. Surely something there could explain Morgan's reason for renting a space. I can't allow that without a warrant. Madison simply looked at Terry, and he was on the phone to request a verbal one. Coming shortly, I assure you, Madison said. How long has Morgan been renting here? A few months. Does she come with any sort of regularity? Is there a way for you to tell? Absolutely. Everyone needs to sign in so we know who is in the building should there ever be a fire or other emergency. Carrie, could you... Selma petitioned the woman who had initially greeted them. Carrie clicked on the keyboard. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday evening, she said. Time of checking in? Within minutes of 5:30. So Morgan worked at the law firm during the day and, afterward, made her way here 3 times a week. Whatever had her focus had her driven. They really needed to get into her office to see if they could figure out what that was. Detective Knight? Terry motioned for her to step back with him. It's a little messy, as this is out of Styles PD's jurisdiction. Well, make it less messy. Wish I could, but a verbal search warrant is a no-go. Even though she's a murder victim? Terry pressed his lips as if to say, out of my hands. She clenched a fist at her side. I'm not just turning around and heading home. Not when we've got this lead. I'm not sure there's much we can do about it. She scanned his eyes and knew he was right, as much as she hated it. She took out a card and handed it to Selma. We'll have to come back, but if anyone comes looking for her, please get their information and let me know. But don't let them know I'm interested. Sure, no problem. Madison detested being in a position where her hands were tied. But not all was lost. They didn't have authorization to access Morgan's office, but they did have approval to access whatever was on her tablet. That was waiting for them back at Styles PD. Another option was to visit Shane Walker again and ask him about innovative creatives, but Madison wasn't going there just yet. Chapter 34. Before leaving Innovative Creatives, they asked about Shannon Brennan and Dana Ridley, and no one had heard of them. They showed Selma and Carrie the picture of Justin McBride in case he'd shown his face, but there was no recognition. Madison pulled into the lot for the Styles PD about 6:30. I can stay a bit longer, but I need to call Annabelle, Terry said. They'd already discussed on the drive that they would scour Morgan's tablet that had been in her purse at the time of the shooting, and hopefully find out why she was at Innovative Creatives 3 times a week. If that included Google searches and a sleepless night too, so be it. They also planned to get the subpoena request underway for Russell Brennan's phone records, now that they had more than enough to substantiate it. They had the cash taken out with his bank card and the corresponding amounts being deposited by McBride. Terry went toward their desks, phone in hand, and Madison took a detour to find Troy. He'd texted to say he had gone home for Hershey but was back at the station. He had a desk, not that he was at it a lot, nor did he like to be, but the paperwork had to get done sometime. He didn't have a Terry. Troy was blessed with actual office space, though he had to share it with 5 other detectives and officers with SWAT. The door was open, and he was the only one inside at the moment. Madison knocked on the doorframe, breaking Troy's concentration from what he was working on. Hey there, beautiful. Hey. He was so gorgeous just sitting there. His blonde hair, strong arms, lean, muscular frame. Close the door. He bobbed his head toward it. Oh, really? She smirked. Get your mind out of the gutter, woman. He got up and went to her. He swept a finger through her hair, then kissed her with enough heat to make her toes curl. I needed that. Was delicious. She licked her lips, savoring the display of affection. Sit if you want. No thanks. I just got back from Braybury. I've been sitting for hours. How are things going with the investigation? We've got a lead and a suspect. And where are things with the mob? She'd told him about McBride's murder the morning after his body was found and that Tatiana Ivanova was her prime suspect. Where they were before. So you haven't taken on any rogue missions? No. There's just something about all this that isn't sitting well. Nikitin and McBride get taken out, but it's not like the mob or this Tatiana tried to cover their tracks at all. She put a hand over her stomach, sensing what he might mean. You think Tatiana's calling me out. He took her hand into his. We don't know that for sure. But I sense there's one coming. Not exactly a but if she is a great assassin she's been made out to be, shouldn't she be good at concealing her presence? He drilled his gaze into hers. She dropped into the closest chair. He knew about the eyewitnesses at Kayla's and Nikitin's buildings. You think she wanted to be spotted so I'd know she was out there and possibly go after her. Just watch your back, please. I know how cocky you can get and, hey, that's not fair. He held up a hand. I say that with love, okay? You can't take her on by yourself, and you don't have to. She blew out a deep breath and nodded. It felt good to know he was by her side, but it also hindered her in some ways. Before, she would have acted far more impulsively. Now she had him to consider. All right, so what do you say we do? We do this by the book. I'll talk to my sister, and we'll involve whoever we need to. We'll arrange a sting on the house. Madison knew the house he referred to, the one registered to a numbered company that tied back to Roman Petrov. I want to be there. He peered into her eyes, concern written all over them. Oh no, you're not squeezing me out of this, she said. I don't know if there's another option. She shot to her feet. Of course there is. He put his hands on her shoulders, but instead of shrugging him off, she let him calm her down. She wants you dead. I thoroughly believe that, he said. She gets you on her property, then, well, I don't want to think about it. She touched his cheek, softened and distracted by his concern for her. But she didn't need it, not really. She'd gone up against the mob before and have lived to talk about it. She was a lot tougher than he was giving her credit for, and it chafed. She lowered her hand. We're a team. That's what you're always saying. I do, and we are. Then we do this as a team. He shook his head. Sure, on the record. You want them to pay for their crimes, don't you? Or is this just about taking them down now? His question and accusation stung, as it held truth. So often the Russians escaped justice. They got off with barely a slap on the hand. They made bail, and their trials met with either hung juries or an innocent verdict. Their money and power, the fear they put into people, went a long way. It seemed to hold sway over everyone but her. And maybe, instead of seeking justice through the system, it was time to color outside the lines. His face darkened when she didn't respond. Don't tell me. They always manage to slip through the justice system. So your answer is to take them all out? No, of course not. She huffed and crossed her arms. But how do you expect to get a sting authorized, huh? That's what I'd like to know. That part I don't know, yet. See, we're not just running in there, Maddie. If I find out that Tatiana has Kayla Fleming, I'm not waiting for everyone to get their shit together. Maddie, come on, that's not fair. We want to take her down the right way. She met his gaze but said nothing. At least I thought we did, he mumbled. She went to the door and turned around. I've got to work late tonight. You headed home to be with Hershey soon? Yeah. You be safe too, okay? Please. I will be. He blew her a kiss, and she sent one flying back at him. Chapter 35. After leaving Troy, Madison went to the lab and found Cynthia still there but getting ready to leave. No one had the luxury of regular hours this week. Have you unlocked Morgan Walker's tablet yet? Cynthia laughed. There is so much on my plate right now, and my team's. Quite sure Mark has the passcode, but that's as far as we've gotten. That's as far as I need. I'll take a look at it. Terry and I are thinking it might give us a clue about what she was up to at Innovative Creatives. Now might be a good time to tell Cynthia she suspected that Morgan Walker was her friend Courtney Middleton from college. But Madison decided against it. The fewer who knew, the better. At least for now, until the case was solved. Well, have at it. I can get it for you from lockup. Yes, please. Madison followed Cynthia into secondary evidence storage. It resembled a locker room and housed items that were still awaiting processing. After that, they went to long-term storage. Cynthia punched codes into a computer, and one of the compartments opened. Madison signed out the tablet, the chain of evidence falling to her now. That meant she was responsible for anything that happened to it until it was returned to its cubbyhole. Cynthia locked the door again and studied Madison. So, what's going on with you these days? Nothing. Just have murders to solve. She turned to leave. Cynthia touched her arm, stopping Madison. You always have murders to solve, but there's something else. Something dark. Something personal. Everything all right between you and Troy? Except he doesn't know the secret I'm holding, that I really don't want kids? Yes, great. Then it's something else? She made a show of tapping her chin. Madison jacked a thumb over her shoulder. Can this wait? She lifted the tablet. I have work to do. I'm pregnant, Cynthia blurted out, eyes wide. What? What do you mean? Madison was stuttering. The room was spinning. Cynthia smiled. You're supposed to say congratulations. Madison hurried from the room. Her torso arched forward as she wished her legs would move faster. She needed to get away from Cynthia, just for a few seconds, and compose herself. Deep breaths in, deep breaths out. She slipped into the restroom and locked herself in the first stall. Madison, what the hell? Cynthia was standing on the other side of the door. Come out and talk to me. What's going on? I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about anything. Why couldn't Madison just turn the clock back and never get pregnant in the first place? Then she wouldn't have lost the baby, and she wouldn't be in such a conflicted, emotional mess. Oh, we're talking about whatever this is. Cynthia was using her firm tone, one that Madison could rarely say no to. But she couldn't open up to her friend, not about everything. But she ended up unlatching the stall door and coming out. She hugged the evidence bag with the tablet to her chest. It served as an energetic barrier protecting her. But from what? The damage was done a month ago. Cynthia was leaning against one of the sinks, arms crossed. You're scaring me, Maddie. What's going on? I lost a baby. The admission hurled out of her, and she wished like hell she could reel it back in. Tears pooled in Cynthia's eyes. I'm so sorry, Maddie. No, you don't have to be. I'm fine. Troy's fine. Oh, you're not fine. Cynthia wrapped her arms around Madison. Madison trembled within her friend's warm hug. Tears wanted to release so badly, but she wouldn't allow them to fall. She went cold, and Cynthia, maybe sensing this, stepped back. Again, I'm so sorry, Maddie. You know I'm here for you. Yeah, Madison licked her lips. How was she supposed to speak the truth without sounding like some sort of monster? It's okay. Talk to me. It will remain between us. And it would. Cynthia always put whatever Madison told her in the vault. I'm happy. The admission was at once freeing and restraining. Not that Cynthia was yet aware of the context. Cynthia seemed at a loss for words. I'm happy, Cyn. I didn't want a baby. It wasn't planned, but... She sniffled and looked up at the ceiling. But Troy was so excited. Cynthia just stood there, facing Madison, silent, her hands on Madison's arms. You're probably thinking I'm a monster, not even grieving my unborn child. But I'm relieved. I didn't ask for a baby. I didn't ask for a baby, she repeated, and the tears fell in a warm stream. Crap. Oh, sweetie. No, don't sweetie me, and don't think I'm in denial. The words struck her ears as hypocritical as pain bloomed in her chest. She kneaded a spot over her left breast and tried to steady her breath, but her heart was speeding up and breathing was only getting harder. She pinched her eyes shut, wishing she'd never gotten into any of this with Cynthia. Terry was probably wondering why she hadn't joined him at their desks by now. I really should go. No way. Not right now. Do you think I'm a monster? I think I am. Not at all. And I do think you are grieving. You just want to believe that. No, You're still processing everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now. And just because the baby wasn't planned or expected doesn't mean that some part of you didn't come to love it. Love? No, I can't go there. It had taken most of the time she was aware she was pregnant just to come to grips with that fact, let alone celebrate it. She never had a real chance to do that. And Troy, he wants to be a dad, but me? Well, I have no plans of being a mother, now more than ever. But what if that lets Troy down? What if he... She sobbed, and Cynthia hugged her and rubbed her back. Troy loves you, Maddie. He'd never leave you, no matter what. Just talk with him and be clear about your feelings. Madison shook her head. He can never know the part about me feeling relieved. Her heart and lungs were hurting so badly. It was hard to draw in a deep breath. She started gasping for air. Come on, sit. On the restroom floor? Not happening. No. Her head spun. Cynthia's suggestion might not be that bad of an idea. Maybe I should... Cynthia guided her to the wall and helped lower her. Madison's breathing kept coming in desperate intakes. What the hell is... Her throat was tight, her chest heavy. Happening to me. I think you're having a panic attack. Cynthia pulled out her cell phone. Who are you calling? What the... Cynthia held up her index finger and spoke into the phone. Troy, it's about Madison. Oh, shit. This isn't happening. She leaned her head against the wall, but quickly straightened out. Her urgent hunger for air making it necessary. Her vision blurred. Next thing she knew, Troy was hunched down in front of her. Madison, let's get you home. I'm fine. She was so exhausted she could barely form words. Cynthia took the evidence bag with the tablet from her. I'll make sure this gets back to where it goes. You can sign it out again tomorrow. She tapped a kiss to her fingers and pressed them to Madison's forehead. Call me later if you want. Take care of her. She patted Troy on the back and left. Troy was looking at Madison with such a deep pain in his eyes, but there was also some confusion. She was mortified and embarrassed that he was seeing her like this. She felt like she'd been through a hurricane and barely survived it. She could sleep for a month straight with a little effort. Chapter 36. Madison had woken up with her head pounding, and it still was. She'd never had a panic attack before, and she wasn't in a hurry to ever sign up for another one. It was Saturday morning, and Troy had tried to talk her into staying home without success. Kayla Fleming was still out there, either alive or dead, and there were questions about the shooting that still needed answers. I wish you'd tell me what set it off. Troy had said that numerous times, referring to her panic attack, throughout the night and this morning before she left the house. She just couldn't bring herself to tell him. Not yet. She so feared that he'd think she was a horrible person. He was aware she hadn't had plans to be a mother, but the rest, the relief, her conviction not to be one, he didn't know. And how to tell him any of that? But maybe she wasn't as relieved as she liked to believe. Cynthia's words to that effect had struck a nerve. It was just after 9 a.m. when Madison settled at her desk. Richards had sent an email with a recap of McBride's autopsy, and there wasn't anything too telling that they didn't already know from the scene. His eyes were removed while alive. His neck was slashed with a sharp knife with a blade at least 2 inches in width, non-serrated. No hesitation marks. TOD was Wednesday. Madison had also taken out Morgan's tablet from evidence. Mark was in, not Cynthia, so at least Madison hadn't needed to face her yet. She felt horrible for last night. Her friend and her husband were expecting their first child, and so happy about it. Madison had ruined Cynthia's moment with her own feelings. How selfish. Madison fired off a quick text to Cynthia. So happy for you guys. She stared at the smile emoji, feeling like a fraud and doing her best to separate her personal emotions from Cynthia's situation. Hey, for you. Terry arrived, holding up one of 2 cups from a tray. Venti caramel cappuccino. She appreciated the thought, but found his exuberance tough to swallow. She had no desire to be viewed as a delicate flower, and she likely had Troy to thank for this treatment. He had probably told Terry what had happened. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. Wouldn't dream of it. So, that's Morgan's tablet? Who else's would it be? she slapped back with a smirk. Sarcasm is alive and well. Guess you are all right. Terry smiled at her. Glad to see it. You might not be happy to learn I'm operating at peak efficiency because I'm determined that we solve this case today, so get ready. It's always good to have high ambitions. He dropped his jacket on the back of his chair and walked back to her desk. I woke up with an epiphany, she started. So far, we haven't had any luck connecting Shannon Brennan to Morgan Walker, but I wonder if we can connect Shannon to Courtney Middleton. Oh, here we go. Listen to me. I have no idea what Courtney has been up to these last 15 years, or the enemies she may have made. You also don't know for sure that Morgan was your friend. Just play along for once. Fine. Let's say you're onto something with this. Shannon and Courtney knew each other. And Courtney did something to Shannon years ago. Then why come after her now? Don't know yet, but maybe the two just recently interacted and something triggered Shannon. Except they often saw each other at the train station where they've been commuting for months. Okay, but Courtney changed her nose. Maybe it was just one look that had it all clicking and Shannon seeking revenge. Ooh, so many hypotheticals. She struggled to find something that would open her partner's mind, but couldn't come up with one thing. Sometimes faith was called for. Just do some internet sleuthing and see if you can find out about Morgan Walker, Morgan Gardner, Courtney Middleton, and Shannon Brennan. Also try Shannon's maiden name. Will do. His eager acceptance to do as she'd asked had her going silent for a few seconds. Guess he is playing along. While you're doing that, I'm going to look around her tablet and see if I can find any explanation for what she was doing at Innovative Creatives. What about a search warrant for her office there? Do we just back off on that? For now, before we waste hours getting the paperwork together. You mean before I waste hours? Very funny. Very accurate. He laughed, and she narrowed her eyes at him. I'll get to work. Thanks. She tipped back her cup, testing the brew with a small sip. Perfect temperature. A few big gulps, and she was ready to study the tablet. She keyed in the passcode, and a slew of app icons appeared on screen. Her phone pinged with a message from Cynthia. Thank you. Hope you're feeling better this morning. Let's talk soon. XO. Madison sent back a quick, "You got it," and proceeded to scour the tablet. The device was loaded with various apps, but she went for the email one first. She started reading through the inbox. Good thing she had the cappuccino, because from the looks of it, she was going to be here for a while. After being at it for half an hour, there was still nothing there to indicate the purpose of Morgan/Courtney's office at Innovative Creatives. It would be so much easier if they just asked Shane what he knew about it, but she had to be careful not to push him too hard right now. She didn't want to give Shane a reason to complain to Winston. In fact, she was surprised he hadn't already. She opened an email from Lucy Jefferson. Subject was investment. That had Madison sitting up straighter. After all, if Morgan was looking to start a business, she'd need the money to do that. Madison opened the message and read. She plucked out the business name, Safe Haven, whatever that was. But some clues were in Lucy's response. It appeared to be a charity. Terry, I think I might have found something. Good thing, because I'm not making much progress over here. Only time Morgan's name comes up is in relation to court cases she worked. I think Morgan was trying to start up a charity called Safe Haven. From the looks of it, she was seeking investors. Sounds like it would be something for abused women and children, possibly animals. I don't know what it's for yet, but people don't usually start a charity unless it means something personal to them. We need to find out what the motivating factor was for her. Let me Google the name. 1 second. The clicking of keys, then nothing coming up for that name. Maybe it's time to see Shane and find out what he knows. That might be the easiest way, but as she'd thought a moment ago, she wasn't going to risk everything by showing her face there again unless it was absolutely necessary. The last thing she wanted this late in the investigation was to be removed from it. There was one possible solution. I can't go, but you can. Just give me another hour here to see if I can find anything. All right. He put his gaze back on his monitor. Terry was treating her differently today, and while she didn't need pity, his cooperation was refreshing. She left the email app and poked around other files on the tablet. She found some Word documents and opened them one by one until she struck gold. The file name had been rather obscure, but the title in the document was Business Plan, Safe Haven. Bingo! What? Terry called out. I have her business plan. She read down and shared the gist of it. Safe Haven was to be a charity group to support families who lost loved ones to drug overdose. Let's assume that Morgan was Courtney. Do you remember Courtney losing someone in that way, or knowing someone who did? Not that I know of, but I haven't known her for over 15 years, if I ever really did. You're not finding anything on Google regarding her and Shannon? Answer is still no. Why had Morgan been starting a charity, and why one that focused on this particular mission? Could the reason be connected in any way to her death? One of the most common motives for murder was revenge. Was Morgan trying to atone for something? She pushed out. Wouldn't know. Had she caused someone to OD? When I knew Courtney, she was up for pretty much anything. I know she tried experimenting with different drugs. Maybe she gave someone bad drugs or too much, then did nothing to help them? Huh. If that person's loved one found this out, that could be motive for murder. Yup. Basing it on the money trail, I'd say that person was either Shannon or Russell Brennan. But which one? Okay, let me try searching another way. He started tapping away on his keyboard, and she rounded his desk and stood next to him. He'd keyed in Morgan Walker Gardner, Courtney Middleton Brennan, drug overdose. A few results filled the screen with all the words crossed out but Brennan and drug overdose. One of these was an obituary for a Scott Brennan from 11 years ago. Click on that, she told him. He did, and a picture of Scott Brennan was staring back at them. It can't be. Her legs buckled beneath her, and Terry rushed to help her stay upright. Here, take my chair. He helped her to it, and she gratefully accepted his offer. What is it? You know this guy? Kind of. When I last saw Courtney, it was in the Roadhouse bar just outside of Styles. That guy, Scott Brennan, was who she was with that night. Terry rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, so we can put Courtney and this guy together, but how does that help us now? Is he a relative of Russell's? She looked at the screen and scrolled down the article, plucking out words as she went along. No mention of cause of death. He died at the age of 27 and left behind his parents and older brother. Russell. What the? Madison snapped her mouth shut. Go to the articles that came up. What do we have? She quickly scanned the screen. Pick that one. Terry clicked a piece entitled, Killer Drugs, What You Need to Know. Read it. Apparently the name Brennan is in there somewhere. Terry used the Find on the Page function and went right to it. The latest victim, Scott Brennan, 27, was found dead in his apartment over the weekend. An autopsy will be conducted, but drug overdose is the medical examiner's preliminary ruling as to cause of death. A look at the rest of the article put that statement into context. There was a batch of contaminated cocaine circling Comsey Park. Comsey Park is where Shane said he'd met Morgan. Had Courtney lived there for a time and made a home with Scott Brennan? Well, his death would have been investigated. We could look that up at least. We'd have to contact the police in Comsey Park. Not a huge deal. No, not that she had the desire to put things on hold to jump through that hoop just yet. Theorizing here. Let's say Russell blames Courtney for his brother's death. Then, more recently, he runs into her and begins scheming how to kill her and get away with murder. He had his wife, Shannon, shot to make the shooting appear random. Dana Ridley was just collateral damage. It's time to bring Russell Brennan in for more questioning. I agree. I think we have more than enough justification. You can say that again. Her mind was still sorting out all the pieces as they headed to the station lot. Terry was already making the call, trying to wrestle up a verbal court order to seize Russell's phone and computer. Maybe they would have their answers by the end of the day. Chapter 37. Russell Brennan, we have some questions we need to ask you. Madison sat across the table from the man and his lawyer. Now the four of them, including Terry, were all cozy in interrogation room 3. Meanwhile, Mark had Russell's laptop and his phone in the lab. The authorization had come through. When we first spoke, Mr. Brennan, we had asked you if you knew Morgan Walker. Do you remember your answer? She asked. Sure, I've never heard of her. So you never knew this woman? Madison pulled a photo of Morgan from the folder she brought. She set it on the table and pushed it across to Russell. Go ahead, take a close look. He glanced down. Nope, I don't know her. Imagine a bigger nose. Take your time. Russell lifted the photo and went through the motions, but the tell was in the way his eyes grazed over the picture. He knew her, and Madison would wager he blamed Courtney for his brother's death. Had Morgan/Courtney also blamed herself? And that was why she had been starting the charity? Eventually, Russell shook his head. No, never seen her before. He tried to hand the picture to her, but she wouldn't take it, and he let it fall to the table. Your brother Scott, she began, and it had Russell locking his gaze with hers. He died 11 years ago. Drug overdose. Russell scowled. What does he have to do with any of this? Apparently, there was a bad batch of cocaine going around at that time, and your brother took some and didn't survive, she said. Stop talking about my brother. Your brother. She pulled out his obit photograph from the folder and pushed it across with the one of Morgan again. And this woman were together. They had a daughter. She was stretching the truth and making assumptions, but she was inclined to believe Leanne was Scott Brennan's child. Also, that when Courtney had run away, she'd done so with Scott. So what? That response confirmed her suspicions. So what? She's dead. Nothing to do with me. And your brother's dead. Madison was being insensitive on purpose to elicit a reaction, and it was working. Russell scowled and balled up his fists. How dare you talk about him? He has nothing to do with any of this. I think he does. Cool, calm, unaffected. What happened? Did she give him the drugs that killed him? She pressed a finger to the photo of Morgan/Courtney. Detective, the lawyer interjected. What does any of this have to do with... She held up a hand. Tell us, Mr. Brennan. She left him to rot. Snot was bubbling in Russell's nostrils. He was in his apartment 1 week before anyone found him. Madison certainly couldn't entertain that Courtney had killed him intentionally. She tried to place herself in her friend's situation. Courtney watched on as the man she loved overdosed. Or maybe she found him dead, panicked, and ran. Not that she must have run far, as Comsey Park was where she'd met Shane Walker. Either way, the hypothetical situations she'd conjured would have been terrifying for Courtney. Not to mention, Courtney would have had a daughter to worry about at that time, too. Had it played out in life as Madison imagined? She was scared, she said, concluding it likely had. No, even if she was, that doesn't give her the right to leave him like that. She could have called for help. Maybe he could have been saved. Is that why you hired someone to kill her? Madison pressed a finger to the photograph again. Tears were pouring down Russell's cheeks, but pure rage filled his eyes. May I advise you to say nothing more at this time, the lawyer said calmly to his client. You hired someone to kill Morgan Walker. At the same time, was he to take out your wife, or was she just to be injured? The lawyer cleared his throat, loudly, and said, Enough, detective. Until you have something to back up these allegations, this meeting is over. It's over when I say it is. She leveled a glare at the lawyer. Mr. Brennan, I just want to know, why, after all this time? There were many other questions to cover, but one at a time. Don't answer that. The lawyer stood and prompted his client to do the same. Mr. Brennan's not going anywhere, she stamped out. We'll be holding your client under suspicion of commissioning a murder. Ridiculous. She ignored him and returned her focus to Russell. Can you explain why the shooter, Justin McBride, deposited $1,500 into his account every time the same amount came out of yours? What? No idea. Huh. Well, you better get comfy, because we're not done with you yet. She stood, and Terry followed her into the hall. She notified a uniformed officer that Russell Brennan was to be taken to a holding cell. What are you doing? Terry asked her. The guy needs to cool off for a while. In the meantime, we're going to the lab to see if Mark has made any progress on Russell's phone and laptop. When Madison and Terry reached the lab, they found Mark hunched over the computer. Tell us you have something, she said. Mark turned to look at them, his expression grim. Can't find anything to indicate Russell Brennan ordered a hit on Morgan Walker and or his wife. Not on his phone or his computer. How can there be nothing there? Did he wipe everything out? Isn't there a way to bring back deleted files? Every bone in her body was telling her Russell Brennan was behind the murders now. I've tried everything, and I'm sorry, but there's nothing here, she growled. The money trail can't be a coincidence. We're missing something. Have to be. She paced, thinking through what they knew so far, and sadly, it wasn't a lot. Questions lingered. One, why after all these years had Russell sought revenge? It would suggest that he just recently run into Courtney/Morgan, but where and when? 2, how did he know how to contact McBride? 3, how could he know where the hitman might find Courtney to kill her? 4, did Russell have help? That was a chilling thought, but maybe Russell passed the cash on to someone, who then arranged the hit with McBride. But who would take that risk for Russell and why? A person who had a close relationship with him and possibly also had something against Morgan? A close relationship. That really didn't seem to apply to the Brennans' marriage. Any evidence that Russell Brennan was cheating on his wife? She asked Mark. Not that I found. She raked a hand through her hair. Why isn't any of this coming together? Maybe it's not him, Terry kicked back. Oh, it is. We just need proof. Someone who helped him hatch the entire scheme. Mark, could you bring up the video of the shooting? Maybe she'd spy something this time she hadn't seen before. Fingers crossed. Yeah, sure. She snapped her fingers a couple of times. It just felt like it was taking him forever to get moving. Seriously? Terry raised his brows at her. We're right on the cusp of solving this thing, Terry. I feel it. By all means, then, be rude to those who are trying to help you. She rolled her eyes. Mark knows this isn't personal. Video? She prompted, and Terry shook his head. The train station surveillance video popped up on a wall-mounted TV. Ready? Mark asked, and just as she was about to respond with something sharp, he smiled and hit the play button. Someone else has found their sense of humor. Madison watched it closely. Kayla sweeping by, the conversation between Shannon, Dana, and Morgan, the shooter confronting them, him pulling his gun, the women ducking. Wait, go back just a bit. Mark did. There, right there. Mark hit pause. Tanya Murray, one of the Just Beans workers. She ducks just before the shooting starts. Could be nothing more than her intuition telling her where the situation was headed, Terry said, a thinly veiled dig at her for her myriad of gut feelings. Don't be smart. Why would she anticipate things would turn violent? They never have in the past. She said she didn't know the guy. But did she? What are you getting at? Terry asked. He and Mark were watching her closely. I think Russell Brennan didn't concoct the shooting all by himself. Maybe he and this Tanya Murray are connected. We never asked if he knew her. We never had a reason. Oh, dear Lord. Terry looked up at the ceiling. Now we have something else to prove. Mark, go back and replay the video slowly, she said. Both of you will see what I'm talking about. Mark did as she'd asked. As the scene played out again, she waited for a reaction. She didn't have to wait long. She did seem to anticipate the shooting, Terry said. Yup, she's in the middle of ducking when he's just going in his pocket for the gun. How did she know he was going to pull a weapon? I'll tell you how. She knew because she was in on this. Fine. How do we prove it? Tanya Murray may be a little more willing to talk if she thinks Russell Brennan is turning on her. But he's not. She doesn't need to know that. Madison was banking on the fact that there was a relationship between Russell Brennan and Tanya Murray, and she hoped she wasn't wrong. Chapter 38. Madison banged on Tanya Murray's door like her house was on fire. What the? The door swung open. Detectives? We need to speak with you, and it's rather urgent. I assume we can come in? Madison looked past Murray and took a step to go inside. Sure. Murray closed the door behind them. You find the shooter? We did. Madison led the way to the kitchen table and sat down. Oh, that's good. Murray smiled, but it faltered. She slid into the chair across from Madison. Terry remained standing in the doorway between the hall and kitchen. It is, Madison said. At least there will be some justice for the victims of Monday's shooting. Murray laid a hand over her heart. So happy to hear it. You wouldn't happen to have known him? A Justin McBride? Madison was trying to get a feel for the situation, as she didn't have it all stitched together in her head yet. Murray frowned and shook her head. Never heard of him. All right, and Russell Brennan? The subtlest of flickers danced across Murray's eyes. You know him, Madison said with confidence. And your relationship with him? Murray rubbed her arms. There is no relationship. Interesting. Madison tossed in the hook. Why interesting? Murray bit. He's downtown telling us this whole thing was your idea." "He what?" Murray spat. "You set this all up for him, didn't you?" Madison pressed, still unsure of the depth of Murray's involvement or motive. On the latter, she only had her suspicion. There was no evidence of an affair on Russell's electronics. There also wasn't a digital trail that confirmed he'd hired someone. But the unexplained withdrawals of cash couldn't be ignored. Madison was going to continue rolling with her theory. "You love Russell and would do anything for him, including hiring a hitman to kill his wife and a woman he blamed for his brother's death." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm quite sure you do. How did you know when to duck?" "Excuse me?" "The day of the shooting. You crouched down before the shooter had even pulled the gun, like you knew it was coming. He was reaching into his pocket. He could have been going for a pack of gum or cigarettes." "I wasn't taking any chances. The guy was yelling at those women. He was caught up in that drug-trafficking operation, too." Hearing her say that made Madison appreciate the poetic justice of how they'd orchestrated the murders. Not only had they taken out the target, Morgan Walker, but the shooting had managed to expose the drug-trafficking operation. It didn't matter that the Russians may not have been the ones to supply the bad batch of cocaine that killed Scott Brennan. The ring was representative of the drug epidemic afflicting the world. It all makes a little more sense now. "What does?" "Just why everything played out the way it did. I just want to know why you'd risk your freedom to help Russell. Was it because of love? Let me guess. His wife was supposed to die, and then you two could finally be together? But she didn't die. Not sure where that leaves you." Murray's eyes filled with tears, but her scowl communicated rage, not sadness. "Whatever Russell is telling you is a lie." Madison didn't say a word, playing the power of silence. "What exactly is he telling you?" Madison shrugged. Murray's eyes darted around the room. "Shannon was never supposed to die, okay? Just that Morgan woman." She spat with vehemence. "But none of this was my fault. He's the one who paid for it." "But you helped facilitate the crime. You hired the hitman." Madison was running with the assumption to gauge Murray's reaction. "Is that what he's telling you? He's a—" She pursed her lips. "A liar. I want a deal." "I'm listening." Not that Madison was in the habit of extending deals. It just wasn't in her nature. If someone did the crime, they should pay to the full extent of the law. "Russ told me about this Morgan woman and what she did to his brother." "What even made him bring her up?" Terry asked. Murray gave a tiny shrug. "Guess he ran into her in Braybury when he went up there about a month ago to have dinner with his wife at some burger joint." Madison glanced at Terry. It quite possibly could have been the same place where they had eaten. The restaurant was close to both Innovative Creatives and Spark Media. "Okay, go on," Madison encouraged. "He just knew it was the girl who his brother had been with. I wanted him to let it go, but every time he brought her up, he became angrier. Then I saw him following her in the train station while I was working. Later, he told me he wanted her dead for what she'd done." "Can you prove any of this?" It all sounded so conclusive, but it would be nice to have something more tangible. She supposed they could always watch the train video for any sign of Russell Brennan. Murray shook her head. "You have my word." "Okay, then what? You knew someone who would be able to take care of her?" "Did he tell you that? What an ass!" "You facilitated the murder. Russell Brennan took out the money, gave it to you, and you handed it to McBride and set out the details of the hit." Murray pinched her eyes closed. "Miss Murray, you're under arrest for commissioning murder," Madison began, and motioned for Murray to stand. She proceeded to snap on cuffs and run through the Miranda rights. Chapter 39. Madison had Russell Brennan hauled from holding into the interrogation room. "We have your girlfriend, Mr. Brennan, and she told us everything." "I don't have a girl—" "Save it. We know everything." "I'm telling you, I don't have a mistress." "Tanya Murray." Madison slapped a color photo from the DMV on the table. "She works at Just Beans. She knew Morgan Walker went there on a regular basis. And when she found out about your beef with her, she helped put you in touch with Justin McBride." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said through heaving gasps for breath. "You're not amusing me, Mr. Brennan. As I told you, Tanya told us everything we need to know. You wanted Morgan Walker dead. It was niggling for Madison, though, why he hadn't paid to have his wife taken out, too. That way he'd be free to move on with Tanya Murray. Was it just a matter of money? From what she could tell by looking at their finances, that shouldn't have been an issue. Then it struck that Shannon would have been released from the hospital yesterday, but they hadn't heard a word from her. And she wasn't at the house when they brought in Russell. Goosebumps raced down her arms. Where is your wife right now, Mr. Brennan? Shannon? She's at home, probably resting. While you're here facing murder for hire charges? She's recovering from a gunshot wound, Detective. She needs her rest. Madison stood. Detective Grant? They both went into the hall. I have a bad feeling. Something's not right. We should have thought of it when we were at the house earlier. At least checked in on her. She couldn't get to the lot to sign out a department car fast enough. Then she swore they hit every red light. Screw it. She flicked on the lights and sirens. What are you doing? Trying to make up for lost time. She pushed the gas pedal to the floor and got them to the Brennan door in 10 minutes. She barely had the car in park when she jumped out. She banged on the door a couple of times. No answer, she informed Terry when he finally joined her on the front step. She tried the handle. What are you doing? We can't just go in. She could be in trouble in there, Terry, and I'm not going to stand around and do nothing. She tried to peek through the window in the door, but the etched glass made that impossible. She stepped off the front step and rounded the house, looking in every window she could. I can't believe I'm following you, Terry grumbled behind her. No one said you had to. She made it to the back of the house, and there was a patio door. The blinds were open, and she could see inside. A figure was standing there. Madison hurried toward the glass. The slider opened, and Shannon eyed them skeptically. Detectives? What are you doing back here? Sorry to disturb you, ma'am, Terry began. We were worried about your well-being, Madison rushed out. How sweet, Shannon smiled at her. But I'm fine. Dread tingled through Madison. She was rather chipper for a woman whose husband was suspected of ordering a hit on her. You're sure you're fine? Yeah, I mean, it's shocking about Russ. I don't know what I ever did to make him want me dead. The words clawed at Madison. Want me dead. Only she was standing there very much alive. The only people in graves were Morgan Walker and Dana Ridley with her unborn child. And Murray had made it sound like Shannon was never supposed to die. If Shannon had, though, Tanya Murray and Russell Brennan would have been free to be together. Why wouldn't they have wanted that? There must be something that Madison was missing. Could we come in for just a moment? I could use a glass of water. Madison was trying to buy more time to figure out what exactly was going on. Sure. Shannon smiled and let them inside. She asked Terry, You? No thanks, he said. Shannon grabbed a water bottle from the fridge for Madison, but there was something off about Shannon's energy. Her movements were quick, and she was being overly accommodating and easy with her dispensing of smiles. Madison drank some water and set the bottle on the counter. You must have been afraid to come home to the man who tried to have you killed. I was terrified. Madison studied the woman. Shannon crossed her arms, then winced due to her gunshot injury that would still be healing. How did you know he tried to kill you? The money you told me about. You said he took out $4,500. We thought it was suspicious, yes. You don't think he paid a hitman now? What was the money for then? Madison didn't like how Shannon kept trying to put the narrative back to Madison to direct. It was shifty. We obviously suspect your husband, Mrs. Brennan. That's why we have him downtown. The only reason we're here was to check on you. And now it's to see through a budding hunch. Okay, why did you come home to a man who tried to have you murdered? Madison was slowly pacing around the kitchen as she spoke, her hand ever cognizant of where her holster and gun were. She made brief moments of eye contact with Terry, who gave the slightest of nods. He'd received her unspoken message of her suspicions and to watch himself. Well, where else would I have gone? Guess I wouldn't know. Madison offered up a fake smile, hoping it passed as genuine. A friend's, maybe? I don't have that many friends, unfortunately. Madison's mind had been tossing around everything Russell had said, his claims he didn't have a mistress. Then there was the lack of evidence on his electronics, and the video, the way Murray had ducked preemptively, and something that just hit Madison now from having watched the surveillance video again. At the time of the shooting, McBride had been wearing a hoodie zipped up tight to his neck, and the hood itself covered most of his face. There was no way Shannon could have seen the red birthmark on McBride's neck. At least not then. She'd seen it some other time. Not even Tanya Murray? Shannon's eyes widened in shock, and she reached for a knife from the block on the counter. Terry moved to stop her, but he wasn't quick enough. Shannon had the blade to Terry's throat. "Stop right there!" Madison yelled, her gun now drawn and aimed at Shannon. "I will kill him! No one else needs to die." Madison caught the fear in Terry's eyes, but she needed to stay focused on the mad woman with the knife. "What did Dana Ridley ever do to you?" "Dana? Oh, the other woman? Nothing. She was 16 weeks pregnant with her first child." Madison searched Shannon's face for any sign of remorse, but she was too absorbed in her own fabricated justifications. "She was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Thrown out nonchalantly. "What about Morgan Walker? She did nothing to you." There was just the trace of a smile. "She was for Russell, a parting gift. Or she should have been. He was the one who was supposed to go to prison for all this. He had reason to want her dead, not me. She left behind a husband, a teenage daughter, and a 5-year-old son." Even as Madison put it all out there, it was clear by the woman's blank expression the words fell on a dark soul. "This isn't on me. It's all Russell's fault." A tear fell, as if on cue, and Madison didn't care for the sudden shift in energy, or the unsteadiness of Shannon's hand that held the knife to Terry's throat. The chick is certifiably crazy. And sometimes there was no choice but to play along with crazy. "Tell me, I'm listening. How is it Russell's fault?" "He wouldn't let me go. I didn't love him anymore." The fog was beginning to clear. Murray had confessed, not to clear her conscience, but to protect Shannon. "You and Tanya Murray are in love." "Yes. Russell was to go to prison, and she and I were going to be together." "You thought that was the only way out, and you made sure Morgan died because you knew we'd find motive against him?" "Yes," she hissed. "He told me about bumping into her and wouldn't stop talking about her and what she did to his brother." Madison's stomach churned. All of this because of some antiquated viewpoint on the sanctity of marriage. If only Russell had given Shannon the divorce she had wanted, then maybe Morgan and Dana and her baby would be alive. All this ran through her head while Madison was laser-focused on Shannon and Terry. He was so scared. "You need to let Detective Grant go. Please, Shannon." "Why should I?" "You're not an evil person. You just did what you felt you had to in order to be with the woman you love." It was making Madison ill speaking these words, but she had to get through to Shannon somehow, and the best way was to present herself as an ally, a person who understood her side. Tears made a wet mess of the woman's face. "You could never understand, and I'm not going to prison." She shoved Terry away and took the knife to her wrist. Blood sprayed everywhere. Vomit shot up the back of Madison's throat. She swallowed the bile back down and turned away. She called 911 while Terry did what he could to staunch the woman's bleeding. Chapter 40. Shannon Murray was dead before paramedics arrived. Madison and Terry had returned to the station to lay out everything for Russell and to let him and Tanya Murray know that Shannon had killed herself. Murray would be going to prison for her role. She'd admitted that her initial confession had been to shield Shannon. But they didn't need Murray's confession. The ATM video came to Mark while Madison and Terry had been with Shannon. Murray was at the ATM at the time the money was taken out of the Brennan account. Shannon had given Tanya Murray Russell's card. "I'm going home for a stiff drink." Terry looked like he was about to collapse. Things could have gone a lot worse today. Trying not to think about it. Failing miserably. "Go home and hug Annabelle and Danny." He waved a hand over his head as he walked away. At least Terry was okay, but there was still more blood spilled. She didn't want to dwell on that, though. She blamed herself, like she always did in such cases. Now the shooting at Liberty Station could be put to rest, except for one thing: Kayla Fleming. An offshoot to that was McBride's murder, but she needed sleep more than anything right now. The mob wasn't going anywhere, and she knew where to find them tomorrow. Plus, her heart had a harder time finding empathy for a hired gun. She hung around and did some paperwork. It was about 9 o'clock when she shut down her computer and headed home. She planned to spend the night tucked in with Troy and Hershey, grateful she had them and happy she'd be able to provide some closure to the Ridley and Walker families. Possibly the Middletons, too, but one thing at a time. She called Troy on the way, and he answered on the second ring. "You home?" she asked him. "Could be in 5 minutes." "Well, that's where I'm headed." "You sound happy. You solved the case?" "Yep. Got a lot of my questions answered, too." "Good." They ended the call, and 20 minutes later, they were both at home petting Hershey. Troy grabbed himself a beer from the fridge and poured her a glass of wine. He brought it to her on the couch. "Oh, do I need this after today?" She took a long sip, sank into the couch, and put her feet up on the coffee table. "Thought it was a good one." "Turned out that way, but it was a little iffy there for a bit." She told him about Terry being held at knife point. "Wow, lucky little bugger." "You could say that. I don't know if I could have saved him. Even if I shot her in the hand to make her drop the knife, would I have been quick enough?" She'd been squeezing the thought from her mind since the incident had taken place, and she was so worn out from thinking about how things could have turned out with Terry dead. "Shoot her in the hand, you?" Troy laughed. She shoved him. "Hey, you're a good shot, but—" He teetered his hands side to side. He had a point. She was taught to aim for center mass. Someone more skilled with a gun, like Troy, would have had a better chance of pulling off the shot she was talking about. But you don't need to worry about any of that now. Troy put his arm around her and clinked his bottle to her glass. He'd always been big into making toasts. To brighter days ahead. "Yeah." She drank some wine, then said, "Cynthia's pregnant." She slowly turned to face him. "Wow, she and Lou must be excited." He smiled, sharing the expression that was so rare for him. She winced inside. Why would he assume they'd be excited? Was it a foregone conclusion with every parent-to-be? Was there something wrong with her? "They are, right?" "Yeah." She gave him a tight smile. If they weren't, they would be monsters, like her. "It's starting to make sense now." He was peering into her eyes with those knowing green eyes of his. "Is that news what set off the panic attack the other night?" She considered her next words carefully. "Is having children really important to you?" The question barely squeaked from her throat. "They'd be nice, but it's not the end of the world. No rush." She pulled away from him, shifted her body to face him. "But you definitely want children someday?" Fear of losing him was starting to tighten its grip around her throat. "Madison, the most important thing to me is you and I. Us. If a baby comes along, then great. But I'm not attached to some image of us being a perfect family with 2.5 kids and a white picket fence." She laughed, finding humor in his wording. "Well, good, because 2.5 would be hard to muster." He caressed her cheek affectionately. "All I'm saying is, I love you, and I have the feeling you're not really sold on having kids. We have touched on this before." She nodded, but they hadn't discussed the depth of her relief after losing the baby. As Cynthia helped Madison see, though, that didn't mean she didn't feel any grief. Rather, she was just bottling it up. "Yeah, and about the 2.5 kids, I don't really see myself with, even one." She felt the need to be very clear so her words couldn't be twisted. "I understand." She stood. "I feel like I'm letting you down." He moved closer to her. "Ridiculous." "What if you look back years down the road and regret not having them? You're going to take off with some hot young thing who wants you as her baby's daddy." He laughed. She nudged him in the shoulder. "I'm being serious." "I realize that, and I'm a big boy too, yes?" She skimmed down his torso, farther down. "Oh, yeah. Then trust me, whatever life has in store for the two of us, together, I'm in. I just want to do life with you." "I felt relief after—" The words spilled out, and his green eyes widened. She swallowed roughly. "After the baby was gone, I was relieved. I've been fighting with my guilt over feeling this way. I didn't even know how to tell you. I must be some sort of monster." "No, not at all. A baby would have meant a lot of changes. They do tend to flip things upside down." "You don't judge me for feeling relief? That was our baby." She choked on that word. "I'd never judge you." He tapped a kiss on her lips. After holding on to this secret for a month, conjuring up images of Troy not understanding her viewpoint, or thinking less of her, and now he knew, and he was nothing but loving and accepting. How had she ever been so lucky to draw Troy into her life? She tugged on him, bringing him even closer. She put her mouth on his and was ready to disappear into his arms for the rest of the night. Her phone rang. "Shit!" "Just leave it," he said. The ringing continued. She thought of Kayla. Maybe it was Detective Marsh with news about her. She pulled away. I've got to get it. Caller ID was unknown, but she answered anyway. Is this Detective Knight? Yes. Word is you're looking for some girl named Kayla? Who is this? Name's not important, but I'm one of Marsh's CIs. The skin tightened on the back of her neck. You have info on her? I do. Something about this wasn't right. Marsh should be calling her, not his CI. And how did he get her number? But she couldn't just ignore what this guy was saying either. Where is she? Is she all right? Far as I know. She was quickly tiring of his short, clipped answers. You've seen her. Tell me now. Where? Down near the docks. There's an abandoned warehouse there. That was the area where Cynthia had tracked the one number from Nikitin's burner. Was that a coincidence? When did you see her? Looking at her right now. Don't go near her or spook her. I won't. And where did you get my number? The line went dead. Maddie, Troy said. Everything all right? No, something is really not all right. She met his gaze. That was supposedly a confidential informant of Detective Marsh's. I'd asked Marsh to talk to his CIs in case any of them had seen Kayla Fleming. The CI called you directly? Yeah. She was still puzzled by that. That's hinky. I agree, but maybe Marsh just gave the guy my number to cut himself out? Nah, I don't see that. Fine, but it is a possibility. A reasonable explanation for this guy calling me directly. Call Marsh and ask if he's been handing out your number. She tried calling Marsh, but there was no answer. She hung up without leaving a message. Can't get him. You do realize this could be a trap, Troy pointed out. It could be. Where did he see her? This would likely be the point where he'd insist that appropriate hoops be jumped through and everything done to protocol. She shook her head. She could leave the area. I can't take that chance. I've got to go. Troy grabbed her arm. Not without me, you're not. She put her hand over his and nodded. Chapter 41. The sun was gone and night had moved in. 10 o'clock was not exactly the most cheery time to be down at the docks, mingling among vagrants and druggies, and she and Troy were trained and armed. They were also wearing vests. Surprised you didn't want to go in with warrants and loads of backup, she said to Troy. You don't have the patience. Just be careful, okay? She'd never forgive herself should something happen to him because she dragged him into this mess. He nodded, and she loved him for his sacrifice in this moment. She'd always admired his courage and his strength, and his drive to find justice. She envied his ability to step back and gather intel before moving in, an aspect he was letting go to support her. It could be because he didn't feel he had much of a choice. She would be going with or without him. They entered the warehouse, and shadows slithered and crept. Fires burned in metal drums, and there were sleeping bags and shopping carts, cardboard boxes, crates. People were in small cliques around the building and didn't pay her and Troy any attention. She leaned against Troy. I'm getting a bad feeling. Her heart was beating rapidly, but she could already feel the familiar warmth of adrenaline moving in. Just now? Then Madison saw her, Kayla Fleming. She was about 30 feet in front of them. Madison called out her name, but the girl held up a hand and yelled, Stop! We're here to help you. Madison kept walking slowly and, getting closer, noticed the girl was crying. But there was also something strapped to her chest. Fuck this day! She's rigged with explosives, she said to Troy, but he must have already noticed himself. He had his phone to an ear. No signal, he said. That's a good thing, right? Then the bomb can't be detonated. Bombs go off without cell phones. Could simply be on a timer. Shit. Yeah, shit. Kayla, remain calm, okay? Madison approached the girl cautiously. The small red digits came into clarity. 2 minutes and counting down. She spoke to Troy over her shoulder, keeping her voice low. Please tell me you know how to disarm this thing. Bombs aren't my area of expertise. Shit, shit, shit. We're going to see if we can get you out of this thing, Kayla. Madison holstered her gun. I don't want to die. Kayla was crying and hysterical. I know, sweetie. We'll do whatever we can to help you. She said if you tamper with the vest, it will explode. There's nothing you can do. Kayla trembled. This was a trap, one set by Tatiana. Her seeming disregard for whether she was spotted at Nikitin's or Kayla's buildings. then leaving McBride's mutilated body where it would be found. All of it was a part of her tactic to draw Madison out. The call from the fake confidential informant had been the cherry on top. Son of a bitch. You sure we can't just... Troy pulled on her arm. Madison, we've got to get away from her now. We can't just let her die. This was another cruel trick by Tatiana. She, no doubt, remained at a distance watching the situation unfold. There was probably a camera in the rafters pointed on them right now. She was probably having a good laugh over this. Madison, Troy screamed. We have to go. The timer is down to 30 seconds. 29, 28. I'm so sorry. Tears fell down Madison's cheeks as she turned to run, Troy pulling her along with him. She felt like a doll blowing in the wind. Along the way, she yelled for others to leave, but they looked at her and Troy wide-eyed and uncomprehending. Madison and Troy made it to the doorway of the warehouse when the explosion thundered, rocking the night and the ground beneath their feet. The concussion blew her and Troy forward, and the next thing she knew, she was flying. Her arms reached out, trying to brace herself, but there was nothing but air. Then she landed. The impact forced the air from her lungs. Troy! That's all she could get out before her vision went black. Chapter 42. Madison's head pounded and spun. Her ears felt like they were stuffed with gauze. Still, she heard a woman's voice, a Russian accent. Not much of a challenge for me. I should have never bothered sending them after her, the woman said. Madison was nudged with a shoe in her ribcage. It took all of Madison's willpower not to scream out and open her eyes, but the woman thought she was dead. Right now, that was to Madison's advantage. What is she talking about? Madison was having a hard time concentrating, but it was obvious this woman was talking to someone. She opened her eyes just a slit and made out two figures. One male, one female. Tatiana Ivanova. I should have never bothered sending them after her. The statement pinged around in her head. Then Madison deciphered the meaning. The car accident last month. It hadn't been an accident at all. The corrupt cops hadn't acted of their own accord. They'd tried to kill her because the Russians, specifically this woman, had ordered them to kill her. Madison wriggled her fingers, doing so cautiously, as it seemed to go unnoticed. She reached for her holster, every movement excruciating. Her fingertips danced over the handle of her weapon. I can do this. A deep breath in, and she yanked her gun out and fired off 2 shots in quick succession. Madison rolled onto her side, her body moving on sheer willpower fueled by adrenaline, and she got to her feet. One shot had found purchase in the man, who now lay on the ground bleeding out from a wound to his throat. Tatiana was standing back with a gun in hand, but she hadn't returned fire. Detective, glad to see you're alive. Now I can kill you myself. Madison managed to duck and roll behind a dumpster just as Tatiana squeezed off a round. The bullet pinged off metal. Madison returned fire. Tatiana screamed, and her gun went flying from her hand. Madison inched out, her gun trained on the woman. She'd struck her in the shoulder, but Tatiana wasn't cradling it. Rather, she was leaned forward, arms open, like she was summoning her opponent in a wrestling match. Heard you ended up losing your baby. Probably not good mother material anyway. How did she know that? But it took everything for Madison not to pull the trigger and end this woman's pitiful life. Anger was coursing through her body, and all she could see was red. What? Nothing to say to that? Madison got closer to her. You're under arrest for the... Tatiana chortled loudly and, with the swoop of her leg, threw a high kick, knocking Madison's gun out of her hand. She shuffled trying to go for it, but Tatiana pulled her back. Madison spun and landed a punch square in the woman's face, but she laughed like she hadn't felt a thing. They threw punches and juked, each taking turns dominating. But Madison couldn't keep going like this for long. She felt her energy draining. She could have been bleeding internally from the blast and the fall. Ah, tiring out, are we? Tatiana smiled down at her. Madison refused to go out like this, to have this Russian's face be the last thing she'd ever see. She pot-shot her in the nose, the cartilage giving way under her fist. Tatiana howled in pain, but only gave a fraction of an inch. Maybe this is how I die. She turned her head to avoid a direct blow and spotted Tatiana's gun. It had slid just under the front edge of the dumpster. If she could get to it, a foot away. Madison kept fighting back and did her best to shift closer to the weapon. 6 inches away. She reached out, her fingers longing to grasp the handle. More scuffling. And enough of the distance was closed. Madison grabbed the gun, and as Tatiana drew back her fist, getting ready to strike again, Madison pulled the trigger. Tatiana's face exploded with the impact of the bullet, and her blood rained down over Madison just before she started to fall forward. Madison quickly pushed the woman's body from her and puked on the pavement. Troy! She pulled herself off the ground, stumbling, searching. Troy! She called out his name as loudly as she could. She walked around, becoming frantic. Why wasn't he answering her? Why couldn't she see him? The warehouse was ablaze and lighting up the sky, but it didn't seem like enough. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it over the area. Then she caught a glimpse of his boot, his jeans. Troy! She ran toward him. He was pinned under a steel beam that must have been thrown out of the warehouse when it exploded. She dropped down next to him. No, please, dear God, let him be alive. She felt for a pulse, and it was so small and thready that she almost missed it. She went to dial 911, but heard roaring sirens and, soon after, flashing colored lights filled the sky. Hang in there, please. Madison kissed Troy's forehead. Chapter 43. 4 days later. The sun was shining like nothing bad ever happened. Only it did. Madison looked down at where she held Troy's hand. How could she ever say goodbye? Warm tears splashed her cheeks, and she sniffled. He appeared so peaceful. His eyes fluttered open, and she kissed his lips and pulled back, palming her cheeks and acting tough. Don't ever scare me like that again. Guess now you know how it feels. He squeezed her hand. He had stayed vigil by her bedside for 2 days while she'd been in a medically induced coma after the car accident. Right now, they were in his hospital room, and the sun was beating through the window. He was just waking from a nap. I'm so sorry, Troy. None of this is your fault. Big boy, remember? He winked at her. She smiled at him. Of course, I do. According to the doctor, Troy was going to be fine. He'd cracked his femur and had 2 broken ribs, but if the beam's weight hadn't been supported somewhat by other pieces of debris, it was quite possible that she could have lost him. Madison had a bunch of scratches and bruises, but no broken bones. A miracle in itself. She was suffering mentally more than physically. The body tended to heal much faster than the mind. She couldn't help but chastise herself that it hadn't been for her, Troy wouldn't be in that hospital bed. And poor Kayla. Tatiana had used that girl as bait to draw out Madison. And it wasn't just Kayla's death that rested on her conscience, but a total of 31 people died in that warehouse. All because Madison couldn't let things go. Kayla, the mafia. Tatiana had been able to use this weakness against her. I'm done, Troy. Done what? Going after the mob. It's time to let them go. You're only saying that because you killed their star assassin. Tatiana. Madison had also taken out the man who had been with her. A phone recovered from his pocket confirmed he had been the one to call Madison to get her to the warehouse. No, she shook her head. There will be more that rise in her place. This vendetta I have against them has gone on for long enough. I've almost gotten myself killed more than once, and I've put others in danger. You, Terry, our baby. You don't know they're to blame for that. They didn't help things. She'd told him about what Tatiana had said and that she'd ordered the cops to ram her car, and he hadn't had much to say to that. She had a feeling he was too angry to speak. She went on. And maybe life will improve for all of us if I just leave them alone. If there was anything this case had taught her, it was that grudges were deadly. Even though Russell Brennan hadn't ordered the death of Morgan Walker, he'd still spent years with hate in his heart. It's just not worth it. One day the cost could be too high. She'd been warring against the Russians for far too long. She held them responsible for killing her grandfather, but he was gone. There would be no bringing him back. And by clutching to the memory of him, she was bound to turn herself into a martyr at some point. And that wouldn't be what he would have wanted. It was time to relinquish the vendetta before it ate her alive. Or took everyone from her who she held dear. You're just going to let them go? She shook her head, feeling the tug of a smile on her lips. They killed a lot of people in that warehouse, and the feds are far better equipped to weed through the evidence and hold the mob accountable once and for all. I've already called them in, and they're going to make sure justice happens. I should have called them in years ago. Troy squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you. A few seconds ticked past before he spoke again. But what about the corrupt cops? Oh, I'll still expose them whenever I can. Yeah, that's my woman. He pulled her to him for another kiss. When they parted, he said, I'm sorry about that girl. I know you really wanted to save her. Yes, I did. Kayla Fleming. She said her name because she wanted to always remember it. The girl had a horrible life with a horrid ending, but there were more like her who Madison might be able to save. That was the part she had to focus on or risk losing her sanity. You have the funeral today, right? For Courtney? Troy's eyes shot toward the clock on the wall. You don't want to be late. I won't be. She smiled at him. When it came to Morgan Walker/Courtney Middleton, there was closure and an extra $20 in her pocket from winning the bet she made with Terry. The DNA test had come back in 2 days, and the results were a match. She'd driven up to see the Middletons to let them know what she'd done and shared the findings. She thought they might be angry with her for crossing that line, but they weren't. They thanked her for caring about them and their daughter so much. When they were told they had 2 grandchildren and that their daughter had set up a charity, they showed enthusiasm about taking over from where she'd left off. Madison had also confessed what she'd done to Shane Walker. He didn't take it quite as smoothly, and there was some resistance. But eventually he conceded that he understood why she had done what she had. It had only been motivated by love and a drive to find the truth. Now everyone had closure, and she and Troy had a fresh start. What would tomorrow look like? Only one way to find out. Release the past and move forward. A letter from Carolyn. Dear listener, I want to say a huge thank you for choosing to listen to Girl on the Run. If you enjoyed it and would like to hear about new releases in the Detective Madison Knight series, just sign up at the following link. Your email address will never be shared, and you can unsubscribe at any time. carolynarnold.net/MK updates. If you loved Girl on the Run, I would be incredibly grateful if you would write a brief, honest review. Also, if you'd like to continue investigating murder, you'll be happy to know there will be more Detective Madison Knight books. I also offer several other international best-selling series and have a number of published books for you to savor. Everything from crime fiction to thrillers to action adventures. Please visit my website to browse all of my available titles. Often, as a writer, I'm asked what inspired a book, and for this one, I pulled from a real-life experience. They say real life is stranger than fiction, and sometimes that's true. I was in a train station, much like the one I described in the book, and went to get a coffee. There was a girl with a backpack who grabbed food items from the refrigerated unit. I was in line with a few other women, and we started talking among ourselves. We couldn't believe what we just saw. We were trying to get the attention of the clerks, and this man came over. He was all hopped up. He raised his voice and told us to mind our own business. And what were we, a bunch of good Samaritans? He even went so far as to claim he was a cop. I wanted to contest that, but a strong instinct told me to stay quiet and hope he went away. Thankfully, nothing came of this confrontation, but I think all it would have taken was for one of us to really stand up to him. The clerks at the counter seemed to shy away, as if they were oblivious to the situation. I walked away that day, but I was shaken. In the deepest part of me, I know something was going on in that train station. I even reached out to a police friend of mine and ran the scenario past her, and she said that it sounded like drug trafficking to her. She told me that I did the right thing by staying quiet. It was this event and the questions of what if and what's going on that led me to create the story you've just finished listening to. I want to give a shout out to Officer Rebecca Hendricks, who served with the Quinton Police Department. She reached out to me years ago to tell me how much she enjoyed the Detective Madison Knight series because she saw herself as Madison. We've remained in contact, and Rebecca has always been there if I had a procedural question. For the writing of this book, it was no different. Thank you, Rebecca, for your experience and insights. As always, I want to mention my husband, George, who is my best friend. He's believed in me and my writing from the start and has remained by my side for over 26 years. Love you, George. I also want to voice my appreciation for the editors who worked on this book and helped push me to make it the best it could be. Last but certainly not least, I love hearing from my readers. You can get in touch on my Facebook page, through Twitter, Goodreads, or my website. This is also a good way to stay notified of my new releases. You can also reach out to me via email at carolyn@carolynarnold.net. Wishing you a thrill a word, Carolyn Arnold. Connect with Carolyn Arnold online at carolynarnold.net, facebook.com/author Carolyn Arnold, and twitter.com/Carolyn_Arnold. For more audiobooks by Carolyn Arnold, visit carolynarnold.net/audiobooks. You can also sign up to be notified when new titles become available. This has been Girl on the Run, a Detective Madison Knight mystery. Written by Carolyn Arnold. Narrated by Samantha Novak. Copyright year 2022 by Carolyn Arnold. Production copyright by Carolyn Arnold.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.